The opportunity to debate this topic. I've been calling for this debate for some months, and I thank the 156,000 electors who've voted for us to have this debate today. And the pandemic treaty must be viewed in coordination with the changes, proposed amendments to the international health regulations. As George Santanea said, that those who fail to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. And I do have some severe worries that the lessons of the last pandemic have not been learnt by the WHO themselves. And we are in danger of giving them more powers to enable them to overreach themselves and repeat those same catastrophic mistakes again. I would like to start by talking about the WHO itself. As my honourable friend for Don Valley pointed out, it was founded in 1948, a specialised agency of the United Nations responsible for international public health. It consists of 192 member states, basically the whole of the UN membership, excluding Liechtenstein and the Holy See. And it was based originally on a WHO constitution, which is still today, but this constitution will be fundamentally changed by the two instruments that are in the pipeline following the COVID-19 pandemic. The WHO is domiciled in Geneva, and so it has special status. Its employees are exempt from tax, and they and their families all have diplomatic immunity. It is indeed a supranational body, unelected, and unaccountable. I think my constituents would fear that. How is the WHO set up? Well, it has something called the World Health Assembly. It meets yearly in Geneva. It's a legislative and supreme decision-making body of the WHO. It elects the Secretary General, the Executive Board, and votes on policy of the WHO. And the current chairperson of the World Health Assembly of the WHO is a gentleman by the name of Harsh Vardhan. In 2021, Mr. Sharma, the Indian Medical Association, the Indian version of the BMJ, the largest association of doctors in India, issued a statement where he objected to Vardhan, who was endorsing Coronil, a product that was being made in India. The IMA, the Indian Medical Association, questioned the ethics of a health minister, Mr. Vardhan was the health minister at the time, of that country to release a fabricated and unscientific product onto the people of India. He's since gone on to become chairperson of the WHO, who are going to be presiding over this new treaty that's going to be sitting before every government in the world. Given that he resigned from the cabinet in India over this controversy, why has he ever been trusted with greater responsibility? It seems he's failed upwards, like many at the WHO and the WHA. So, the original ideals of the WHO were completely laudable. The WHO is to serve the health of the people. It's governed by its member states who will implement health policy in the interest of our people. State sovereignty and the rule of law will be respected. That's under Article 3 of the International Health Regulations, before they're amended. People's self-determination will be fully respected. All human rights, conventions and other acts will be respected that countries have joined up to. That was protected under Article 54 of the original regulations of human rights. But who's now funding the WHO? Like many of our regulators in the UK, the MHRA, 86% funded by industry sources. The Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, in their personal declarations, they declared over £1 billion of interests in Big Pharma, the thing they were set out to regulate. This undermines public confidence. Well, the WHO now is no longer anything like majority funded by its member states, the people who it is seeking to control. It's 86% funded by external sources. I'm not sure that my honourable friend for Winchester is correct. The UK is not the third largest donor. The second largest donor, it's the third largest donor. The second largest donor after Germany is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I think Gavi is the fifth. So you add those together, they are the biggest donors to the WHO. And you have to think, why are they doing this? They're also the biggest donors or biggest investors in pharmaceuticals and the experimental mRNA technology, which proved so profitable for those who proposed it and produced it during the last pandemic. Indeed, the WHO, it says the member states' contributions to WHO funds have been capped and today account for only 16% of WHO's total budget, with an increasing share of funding to WHO coming from voluntary contributions, where donors direct funding according to their priorities. Well, their priorities might not well be the priorities of my constituents in North West Leicestershire or the electorate in the UK, but he who pays the piper calls the tune. The WHO are promoting the influence of private-public partnerships. They promote that on their websites, to the point where it's pay to play. Anyone can buy influence at the WHO, it's just going to cost you money. And when it comes to when they're consulting, their own internal report, their survey evaluation, final report, May 23, 23rd of May 2022, the various interest groups have more input to the WHO policy than the member states. It said under the WHO's own figures, the member states' only participation was 40% of the input, whereas 60% came from non-member states and 276 stakeholders. So it's clear there's a strong external influence on the policy of the WHO, an entity which, if the amendments to the international health regulations and the pandemic treaty were to be passed, and doing nothing is not an option. If this House does nothing and does not vote, they will come to pass by May 24. So doing nothing is not an option. It isn't going to go away. So the WHO's intermediate study says the WHO is an international organisation created as a sub-agency of the United Nations for the objective of obtaining the highest possible level of health for all people. But at what cost? At what cost? What cost to democracy? What cost to individual freedoms? It is now 80% funded by non-member states, and it is heavily influenced. And it also, during the pandemic, it took extra powers called the fact that it could define information. It took on a position, and this will be enacted in law and binding in those two new instruments, that the WHO has the ability to say what is disinformation. And when anybody says to you that the science is settled on any issue, I suggest that this House would smell a rat straight away, because science is never settled. There is always open for modification, for new things to be discovered, theses to be refined. And what the WHO is saying is that the WHO will be the arbiter of what the science is. And that cannot be right. It's a bit like someone saying the market's changed. Well, in my experience, it never has. So that is a huge grab of power. And the two instruments, the pandemic treaty and the amendments to the international health regulations, are progressing in parallel. And for those who, I just really worry whether colleagues in this have actually read the treaty, because clearly, you know, when you take out the words "not binding" as an amendment, it then becomes binding. You know, these are binding treaties. If we do nothing, these treaties are binding. They're legally binding across all the nations. They're bringing in an idea called One Health. And this then extends the ability of the Director General of the WHO to call a public health emergency of international concern, which incidentally is abbreviated to FAKE. FAKE. So, and it says that he can bring it in on the suspicion, the risk of an international incident. It doesn't even have to be about a pathogen that's affecting humans. It can affect animals. He's taking the powers because of the environment, or an increase in the levels of CO2. I suggest that honourable and right honourable members read the treaty. It is a massive extension of powers, and at the drop of a hat, one man, Mr. Tedros, can call for massive powers to the WHO, and not only will he call when he takes the powers, he will decide when the pandemic or the emergency is over, and when he'll possibly give us the powers back to this House, where elected representatives are supposed to be representing the interests of our constituents. Well, that will all be suspended. And I would, while we're talking about Mr. Tedros, I mean, I would just remind the House that this gentleman who will be deciding the fate of the world, it'll be within his gift to call these emergencies. The conduct of the WHO in the recent Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where 83 individuals who are working for the WHO sexually abused local women, and including the sexual assault of a 13-year-old girl. And it was all covered up, Mr. Sharma. And in a leaked document from the WHO, which would have been in front of Mr. Tedros' committee, a confidential UN report submitted to the WHO last month concluded that the manager's handling of the case didn't violate WHO sexual exploitation policies because the woman concerned was not a beneficiary of WHO aid since she didn't receive any humanitarian support. That is completely unacceptable. If that's the rules of an organisation, they'll be deciding whether my constituents are locked down for 6 months, 3 months, and whether they can go and see their granny. I don't think it's acceptable. Also, these new treaties, they compress the time for governments of mandatory reporting lines of 72 hours from when a risk to public health has to be reported to the WHO, and he'll make a decision. This is far too little time for any research, any meaningful research to be done as to what the real risk is, and it will lead to lots of potential for false alarms and unnecessary disruption. These are huge powers that these two instruments would seek to take away from this Parliament and every other Parliament around the world. And they need to be considered very, very strongly. Sticking your head in the sand isn't going to do. It won't do for my constituents. You know, if we learn anything from the vote we had in 2016, is that people in this country, they do not want to be ruled by unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. And there's no one more unaccountable and unelected of people in the WHO who don't pay tax, and they and their families have immunity from prosecution because they've got diplomatic immunity. They're also under the huge financial interests of whoever wishes to fund them. So many experts are now saying that these two instruments would fundamentally reset the relationship between citizens and sovereign states, not in this country, but also around the whole world. Unelected, unaccountable, top-down, supranational body, the WHO. What these treaties will do will empower that Director General to impose sweeping, legally binding, they are legally binding directions on member states. They'll be forced, they have the power then to force companies in this country or any other country to manufacture certain medical treatments and to export them to other countries and be told to do it. It'll have the power to shut down any business in this country, regardless of what the local people think, or even this Parliament. It takes away all the protections that being in a democracy offers. It actually takes away Article 3 in the original Constitution, which is the respect of human right and dignity. That goes and is replaced by a bland statement saying that there will be equity. And equity means whatever it means. It means that everyone's going to be treated equally. It also means that one solution to any international problem around the world. And that leads to an all-or-nothing situation, Mr. Sharma, where if the WHO got it right, and if we want to go in, if I have the time, I'll go into everything they got wrong in the last pandemic. If they get it right, okay, maybe okay. But if they get it wrong, that's the whole of humanity has got it wrong. There's no competition, and if there was only one car manufacturer, only one solution, I'm not sure it would be the best car that we could ever have. I think competition between nations for solutions is a good thing. I have grave concerns over these two instruments. And we have grave concerns. I have grave concerns to consider who's actually running and controlling the WHO organisation. It'd be foolish not to see that big pharmaceutical giants with their lobbying power, they have huge influence over the direction of the WHO. And like many multinational corporations, their size and scale supersedes even national governments. with over 80% of the WHO three-year budget now specified funding, and they have the ability to direct policy. I think it's fair to say we're drifting away from the WHO's original noble ethos of promoting democratic, holistic approach, cooperation to public health. The WHO let us down over COVID with their response. In January 2020, as already been pointed out, they were still telling us that there wasn't person-to-person transmission of the virus. That was wrong. That was wrong. And then they prescribed lockdowns and mass vaccination during a pandemic which drove mutations. The pandemic response by the WHO and the national governments should be a cautionary tale on the impact on citizens of handing power to the state, and should certainly not be a template for going further and faster in terms of signing away rights and liberties. Indeed, the pandemic response was so brutally illustrated. The profit-optimised version of the greater good pursued by the WHO often clashes with children's health. Before I spoke out on the 13th of December with regard to the risks of the experimental mRNA vaccines, the MHRA were looking to authorise the vaccination of children down to the age of 6 months in this country. I'm very grateful that the government listened, and we didn't do that. Indeed, it was then pushed back to people over 50, and after my speech on the 17th of March, I'm delighted that the government now has put it back to only those over 75. That's in a few months. That's a huge difference from we're going to vaccinate everybody, and I think that tells the tale of, if we were all under one rule, we'd be doing exactly the opposite of what this country has individually decided to do. So while we're on the subject of opaque, undemocratic organisations, it's interesting to see what the EU are doing. Well, the EU are actually they think that we need to strengthen all this, and they're going to set up, not only will the WHO be allowed to have a department of misinformation, they'll be the arbiters of whatever the truth is during an emergency. The EU are going to take over exactly the same policy, and they're going to have their own as well. So when we have a pandemic situation, there will be only one version of the truth. Well, that's not very good for science, is it? The One Health approach, it's also a whole society approach. They will have the ability to mobilise every aspect of our society. Once they call those emergencies, they're going to be able to keep them going. They have control of absolutely every aspect of our citizens' life. This is absolutely massive. There's no more important treaty. Of course, if we were to give these sort of powers, which I would never vote for myself, of course we should have a referendum, because sovereignty belongs to the people. It's not ours to give away, and we know that from the referendum we had in 2016. I hope the House listens very carefully and reads these documents.